Hello, in today's episode we're going to look at how can we create a respawn system. So when one of our players dies, or when both of them die at the same time rather, we have this respawn screen, which after a certain time will respawn both of the players, and we also look at how to set certain points on the map so that the red team players spawn on the red team side and the blue team players spawn on the blue team side. As you can see, the blue team players, when they die, they're going to spawn on the bottom side. However, if I kill one of the red players, well, there's only one of them, but if I kill the red guy, he's now going to spawn on the top side of the map, and we look at how can we measure exactly when are the players ready to have their position changed. We need to make some new functions to determine, what is a ready player and when do we find that out, and then how can we set their spawn location to a different point, and how can we respawn them controlled on the game mode. Let's get straight into it. Like I said, in this episode we're going to work on everything to do with spawning the player. So respawning the player when they die, so handling death and respawning, but also making sure the players spawn on the right side of the map, on the right team. Because we have two teams, we have the red and blue team, we want to have red spawning on one side and blue spawning on the other. Now to do that, the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to make 3 new actors to handle the default spawn locations. These are going to be just placeholder actors. We're going to go to our multiplayer folder. I'm going to make a new folder, and I'm just going to call this start location blueprints. We're just going to make 3 actors. So blueprint, make an actor, and I'm going to call this player start default. I'm first of all going to make sure I'm spelling default correctly. Then I'm going to duplicate this and call this player start red. Then I'm going to duplicate it again and call it player start blue. We're literally not changing anything about these actors, we're just making them how they are. I'm going to come over to the start. On this side I'm going to place the player start red. On the other side of the world I'm going to place player start blue. I'm also going to destroy this wall, because when the player spawns right here, we won't be able to see them because the camera's getting blocked by the wall. So I've deleted the wall just so we can see the player. I'm also going to delete all of these objects in the world because I think they're kind of in the way. There we go. I've deleted all of the objects in the world. And the reason we need to have these 3 default locations, I'm also going to place the default one in the middle, is because when we make a start location, all of the start locations are placed into the same category, and we just take the first one and spawn at that start location. We don't actually want to start at the start location because it's harder to control the actual spawning at the location, because we tend to just get placed at the default one set by the game mode, which isn't what we want. We want to run our own logic to change our location, and realistically all the start location is a point. There's a capsule component around it to check that there's space to spawn at the point, but it's just a point in the world. So we can get the same thing with these actors. This is merely a reference to this location to spawn red over here, blue over here, and we have the default one in the middle, just so that if we don't, happen to have a valid location, we'll spawn on the default one, but otherwise that should never really happen. Now, we want to make sure that when we're trying to reassign the player's location, that they are ready to be moved. Now, what does ready mean? Well, I think ready is when the player controller has a valid player state, a valid player pawn, and is valid itself. You see, with multiplayer, we often run into the problem that all of the clients and the server, well, they're running on different computers. They're not all, synced by default. The timings can sometimes be a little quirky. Imagine you're running on a £5,000 gaming PC, your friend's running on a crappy £200 laptop. You're going to be a lot quicker than he is. You're going to load into the map much faster, and you're not going to be ready at the same point. So if you fix a specific delay, if you say, oh, let's just delay by 0.2 seconds, that doesn't really work, especially if you had, for example, 30 people connected to the lobby. Everything slows down by much more, and that delay is not going to work. So by us making our default predefined functions, so let's make one called isPlayerReady. By making these functions, we can determine ourselves is this specific player ready? So are they loaded? Is everything we need for them loaded? And if it is, then we can update their location, because if we try and move them before they've like been spawned in and initialized, then nothing's really going to happen. So we have our is player ready. We need to take in an input of a player controller. Player controller, of course, of type player controller. Player controller. There we go. Then we're going to drag off of the player controller. We're going to say is valid. We can leave this as the boolean this time because we're going to add all the booleans together. Then we're going to get the player state. Get player state. Get the blue one to get the local player state. We're again going to check is this valid. Again with the boolean so we can compare the booleans. And then we're going to get controlled pawn, which is the thing we are controlling. It's the character we're controlling, and we're going to check is this valid. And of course, if we want to initialize the spawn location, if we want to change where the character is being spawned in, we need to make sure the character has been spawned, because we can't change the location of something that hasn't been added into the world. So we now want to return a boolean value, so add a return node with an output called ready question mark of type boolean, and this is going to be are all of these three booleans valid. So if we do an and boolean on the first one, and then an and boolean between the second and third one, and then plug that and boolean into the first one, you know, this will only fire as true if all three of these are true. If any one of them is false, then the player is not ready. We fire false, then we're good to go. I am going to convert this function to a pure function. Now what that means is, I'll just show you in the event graph. There's two types of functions. There's normal functions, which have these input and output pins, and there's pure functions, which are these little green ones, which don't have an input pin, and they just have a return value. That's what a pure function is. It's just, it looks different on the graph, and you just add it to something, and you can very easily now just say, is player ready? And because it's a pure function, it's green and it looks like this, and that just looked cooler, to be honest. It makes us look like proper programmers when we can use pure functions. We look like proper programmers now. Now we want to do another function called are all of our players ready. This is if we're checking one specific player. Now we want to check are all of our players ready, because we don't just need one player, we need everyone to be ready. So let's make a new function called are all players ready, and then this is going to take in an input of an array of player controllers, so call that players of type player controller, and we're going to make it an array. We're going to loop through each of these, and we are going to say is player ready. Now the pure function just makes this look smoother, I think. That's kind of why I made it a pure function. It just kind of looks nicer and easier to read. And we need a local variable called any not ready question mark. Now what this boolean does is by default it's going to be false. So by default we know none of them are not ready. But any time that we fire this and we see that one of our players is not ready, we're going to set this to true, because on completed, when we do a return node, we are going to not boolean this any not ready and return it as being something called all players ready. So essentially, we will only output a true pin if none of them fire false. If they fire true, then the not ready boolean isn't changed, and by default it's false, and at the end we do a not boolean and return it. I mean, that's, you know, it's kind of complicated logic, but it's not that simple. Just follow the process. Just imagine, you know, if player 1 was ready, then this happens. If player 2 was not ready, then this happens. If you don't understand it, then just kind of go through it a bit longer, but let's move on. It's not that complicated. So we have that function now. Now on our player character, we want to make a function to allow them to change their spawn location once they've been spawned in. We are not going to try and change it before they've loaded into the world, because that is going to cause us some issues, because not all the players are going to be loaded in together, and that's why we've added these functions on the game mode. So we're only going to do this when all the players have spawned in and they're ready and they can all be moved at the same time, and everything is synced, and there will be a very small delay when the players load into the world and then they get moved around. But if you don't like that, then what I suggest doing, and it's actually what most games do, is they just have a loading screen over it. A lot of games, like the loading screen, it's just, you know, if your player loads into a new world and then gets loaded again, well, you don't know because the loading screen's there. So if you don't like it, add a loading screen and it's all fine. That's what a lot of games actually do. Now, in the top-down character, let's scroll down, find some space. At the bottom, let's make a custom event called update. Custom event called update spawn location. This is going to update the spawn location of the player. And we're going to say executes on server and is reliable, because the server, like I said many times now, he's the referee, he's in charge of the match. If something's happening, if, you know, a player's location is being spawned and changed, you know, that's kind of the game, you know, the game mode is changing where the player is spawned based on what team they're on. That is some important logic. You know, the player client shouldn't be able to control that, because the client shouldn't have any control over how they're allocated to the team. If you play a game like League of Legends, just imagine, you know, do you think the player has any control over what team they're on, over how they're spawned into the map? No, not really. It's all on the back-end servers, literally on the server. So we're going to run this on the server. When this happens, we're going to get our player state, get player state. Make sure this is the right player state by saying get match player state, just so we have the actual player state. And we need this because we are going to switch on our team. So get team. Now, the reason I'm getting this team and not just assuming this is the right one is because we know the correct one is always 100% stored in the player state. The reason we're holding the team was more just to have this passing variable that we could put into the health component. Realistically, the team isn't supposed to be held and stored on the character. That job is the player state, because the player state persists even when the character is destroyed. So we don't really care about having all of the update logic on here for the team. We only did this so we could pass it through to the health component and bind it on the health component so we could demonstrate how that's done. But I showed you when we looked at the health component how we can use event-driven systems. So if you don't like it, then go and change it. You know how to from the health system video. That's the whole point of tutorials. You learn, you get better, and then if you don't like it, you can change it, because you don't have to follow the tutorial 100% the same. Anyways, little rant aside, let's switch on whatever team we're on, right? You know, we're on a team. Let's switch based off that to do a different logic based on, you know, whatever team we're on. If we have no team yet, which shouldn't really happen, but just in case, you always want to make sure you're covering the edge cases. We're going to get actor of class. We're going to get the player start default, and we're going to say set actor location, which is, you know, our self, and that new location is going to be the actor location of this player start default pin. So we know we've placed it in the middle of the world. It's going to be this location. If the player happens for some reason to have no team, they're going to spawn in the middle, or they're going to get updated their location to be spawned in the middle. We can then duplicate this code down here, and on red pin we can do the same thing, except on, instead of player default, we're going to say player start red. Copy and paste this down here, and then if we're on the blue team, we're going to spawn at location player start blue. Very nice. Compile and save that. Now, back in our game mode, we're going to call to this function. We're going to check, are all our players ready? And if they are, we can call to the function. So let's go back to our event graph. We can close some of these down. We don't need them all open right now. If we go to where we assign our player teams. Before we assign the teams to the player, we would first like to make sure, are all of our players ready? The players we're going to input is the match players. We know that the match players, all the way back from like episode 3 or something when we set this up, the match players, if you remember, we add each player as they log into the map to our match players array. So we know these are all the players playing in the game. And if this is true, then we should follow on with assigned teams. If this is false, if the players aren't all ready, we're going to do a short delay of 0.2 seconds and then just try again. Because, you know, this, when we say delay, right, when we say that the players haven't all synced yet, it's very, very short numbers. You know, it might literally be one player is 0.1 second behind the other, so you know the players aren't ready, so this fires false, but we need to try again very shortly after, because they will very quickly be ready. So after a very short duration, after 0.2 seconds, you might even make this shorter, but I think for now 0.2 seconds is fine. We're going to try again to run this. So we assign the player teams, then now we're going to loop through our players again. So for each loop, all of our players now have a team, they've just been assigned to a team. So if we loop through our match players again, we are going to get the controlled pawn, get controlled pawn for the player controller. We're going to cast to BP underscore top down character. If you want to use an interface, go for it. I've shown you how to make them so far. I don't need to waste more time doing that. And on that as BP top down character, we're going to call that function update spawn location, compile and save. Okay, so now we've updated the spawn location. There's one little thing I would like to adjust. In our all players ready function, this needs to be set to true. I had accidentally left it as false. So if you copied what I did, this is supposed to be set to true, not false. That was a mistake. Now in event graph, we need to swap these two functions around. I've literally just done it already. They were like this. Event post login would go to here, and event handle starting new player would go to there. But we need to swap them the way around, because on post login was not happening at the right time. An event starting new player, this is what happens as soon as the player is ready. This is what we should check when we're assigning the player teams, because I noticed sometimes we were assigning the player teams before the player was properly loaded into the match, and it's because the event on post login is supposed to go there, and starting new player is supposed to be on this one. Now that all works fine. Now if we compile and save, go to the lobby, play the game, we'll see the 3 different menus load up. And if we move them to the side, yeah, so on that handle starting player and on post login, you might have noticed up until now, I hadn't been getting it. I think it's the logic I just added for some reason slowed it down, but it maybe, you know, you were seeing that some of your players weren't loaded in. I have quite a fast PC, so maybe it's just things were loading quickly, but they weren't all handling at the right time. But now it's definitely working. As you can see, the 3 players, they're all spawned in their right location. Technically, they initially spawn in the map and they initially end up somewhere over here where I put the player start, but then they very quickly snapped to their correct location before the game's actually started. And if I run over, I can now do the attacking logic. So we've now got the players spawning on the right side, where they're supposed to be based off of their team. Let's now handle when they die and respawn, and making sure they die and respawn correctly on the right side. We need to go to our player character, so BP underscore top down character, and at the bottom we're going to add a new custom event. You could also run this on the player controller, but for simplicity we're just going to leave it on the character, but you could also run this on the player controller. We're going to make a new custom event, call this server side underscore handle death. This is handling the death of the player, which is a very important thing that the game mode is going to run. So we're going to mark this as run on server and reliable, because this needs to run on the server. We're going to do a switch has authority to make sure the only person who can run this is the server. So if we accidentally try and run this on a client, the client is not going to run it, it's going to come off the remote. On authority, we'll say get game mode. Then we'll say get game mode ref to make sure we're on the right game mode. get game mode ref. You could also cast, and casting is okay in this situation because we always have a game mode spawn and we've always got one of them, so it is okay. We've just already got the interface for it. Then we're going to get the controller and cast this to BP underscore pop down controller. There we go. Although I thought I changed the name of that. Did I not? Blueprints. Nope, still top down controller. I thought I changed the name. So we've cast it to our player controller, and we now need to, fire an event here, which is going to do stuff, but we don't yet have that event. So we'll circle back later when we make a custom event, but we essentially need to show the death screen, and we need to launch a countdown timer, and then when that ends we're going to respawn the player, but we need to make that function on the controller. Obviously, the way we're going to be notified when this function happens is through our AC underscore health component. On our AC underscore health, we have this thing called server underscore player death. When this happens, we are going to create a new event dispatcher called on death, and we are going to call this. Now, we're not actually going to use this right now because we've just created the function already on the character, and we're going to do it like this. However, when we come to using the base and having the base using the same AC underscore health component, we will call this on death. So we're not going to use this right now. You could go to top down character, go to event begin play, and then search for assign, and then add that to this event, but it doesn't really matter, to be honest, not for this little demo project we're doing. So I'm just going to say get owner of the component cast to BP underscore top down character, and then call that function we just made, server player death. Oh, not server player death. What was it called? Was it server side handle death? There we go. So search for server side handle death, compile and save that. So now whenever we die, our AC health component is going to call the function on our player to tell us that we've died, and our player would like to go to the player controller and basically tell the player controller, hey, we died, handle the stuff. We need to go to the player controller because the player controller persists even when the character dies. The character isn't actually that important. The character is an actor that is possessed by the player controller. The player controller is the main brain behind the character, and the player controller stays there when we destroy the character. If we do this, destroy actor, and then, as soon as we try and run extra logic after this, well, we can't. We've destroyed the actor. There is no actor to run logic on. So if we try to do things now, we can't. But on the player controller, if we destroy this actor, the player controller can go on and do extra things and then respawn us. Very nice. We can't destroy actor and then respawn the actor within the top-down character, but we can on the player controller. But we can't really handle that stuff yet because we don't have a death screen to show. So let's go and create a death screen widget. Go to content drawer, multiplayer UI. Let's make a new widget. Widget blueprint, user widget, call it WBP underscore death screen. Open this up. I've just quickly thrown together a really simple widget. We've got a canvas panel, there's a border that covers the entire canvas panel, and there's a vertical box in the middle saying you died, respawning in, and then there's a respawn timer. This respawn timer text, it's set to a variable because we're going to update this. The only thing you actually need for the logic is just a text that is a variable, so we can update it with some logic. But yeah, you can make this look however you want. Just make sure you've got one variable that's a text called respawn timer. We're going to add a variable to this and call it respawn time. This variable is going to be of type float, and it's going to be instance editable and expose on spawn, so that when we create this widget, we can pass through the time that we want to wait before we respawn. Now the widget isn't going to trigger the respawn at the end, it's just merely a display, but we need to know how long do we display this for, how long do we count down from. So on event construct, we're going to set the respawn timer. We're going to set its text to the respawn time. So if there's 5 seconds, this text is going to show 5, and then we're going to carry on. We're going to say set timer by event, and it's going to do every 1 second, and we're going to promote this to a variable. I'm just calling it timer handle because we've only got one of them. That's not proper naming convention. I am very aware. You know, this is the timer handle, the only one we're going to use, so I'm not really bothered, to be honest, and make a custom event called update time. Now, the reason we did this once first before updating is because this will wait 1 second before firing for the first time. So yeah, we want to make sure we've already done it once before we start the timer. Otherwise, we'll be waiting a second before we show it. So there'll be 1 second where it's displaying its default value, which for us is 0. That's not what we want. We instantly want to see 5 and then move on to update it every 1 second. For the updating time, very, very simple stuff. We're going to set the respawn time to the respawn time subtracted, so subtract by 1, and we're just going to clamp the float to make sure it doesn't go below 0, give it a really high maximum value just so we never are bothered by it. And if this is equal to 0, then we are simply going to branch and say we want to clear and invalidate this timer by handle, but we cannot do that from within the timer. We looked at that in one of the earlier episodes. We have to make a separate custom event for it because otherwise the Unreal Engine is going to throw us an error. So, you know, just clear timer, make a new function for this, clear time. It should be timer really, but it doesn't matter. Get timer, clear and invalidate timer by handle, and we're going to call this function at the end, clear time, which stops the timer. And of course, every time we set our new respawn time, we would like to update the respawn timer to whatever the new time is. So let's duplicate this and put it right there. Now, I think the game mode should be responsible of knowing how much respawn time we have. The widget is going to get it because this is instance editable and expose on spawn. So whoever spawns in the death screen is going to have to pass over that data, and it's not going to be the game mode. But I think if the play controller spawns the widget, the play controller should come to the game mode first to get the respawn time. We're not going to hold the respawn time on the play controller because it's the game mode's job to know that. The game mode is like the referee, the overall boss of everything that's going on. So on the match game mode, we're going to make a new variable called respawn time. At the time it takes for a player to respawn, make it as a float. I'm going to put this to 5 seconds so it's short and we can see it for time. Very nice. Now we need to go to the player controller. So let's go to content draw multiplayer blueprints. Our BPM's got top-down controller, and we need a function for showing the death screen. It's going to show the death screen, it's going to destroy our character, and then after a certain number of seconds, we're going to go to the game mode, and we're going to tell the game mode, hey, spawn in our character and make sure you use that function we made earlier for updating the character's location and go to the right location for the character. To finish off everything we need, let's just close down these tabs that we don't need. So we are going to be showing a widget, which is the death screen, on the client. So the function that we want, the custom event we want, is going to be client side. So we're going to call this client underscore show death screen. It's on the client side because widgets and UI elements are inherently client side things. Showing on the server doesn't mean anything because a widget does not exist on the server. It is not replicated. So showing the widget we can do on the client side, and besides, we only want one client to see their death screen. We don't want all the clients to see everyone's death screen, so just running on in client. But the part where we need to respawn the player, then we can make a separate function which will then run on the server. So we're going to make a separate custom event called server underscore destroy character. So server underscore destroy character, because when it comes to destroying the character, that is important. Everyone needs to know about it. So we're going to run this one on the server and make it reliable, of course. And this one is going to get our controlled pawn. So get controlled pawn, and it's just going to simply destroy it, destroy actor. It's going to delay by a duration, which we are going to pull over. So this duration is going to be delay before new spawn. This is going to be a float. And then after here, we are going to, of course, plug that in first. We're going to call to the game mode, which is going to handle spawning in the new player and then making sure that they get snapped to their new location. We won't handle the entire function yet, but we'll just make the name of the custom event so we can put it in place. So let's make a new custom event. Let's call it handle respawn player. We'll come and sort out the logic for that in a second, but for now we'll just call it so we can keep going with the player controller. We need to get the game mode. We'll say get game mode ref to get our correct game mode, and now we can just call that function handle respawn player. We'll update that function in a second when we finish this part, because that's all we need to do on the player controller. So on the player controller, when this function is called, we need to pull in the time, because we need to know how much time it's going to take before the new spawn, because this is going to call the server underscore destroy character. So server underscore destroy character. So we need to know how much time it is before the new spawn. So time before new spawn. We're going to pass that to the second function. Then afterwards, we're going to create widget. We're going to create our death screen widget. So create WBP underscore death screen. We are going to plug in the respawn time is the time before new spawn. We're going to promote this to a variable. Just call it death screen. Very nice. And before, I've left a bit of room here, because before we create the new death screen, we should just do it easy little convert to validated get. And if this is already valid, we need to remove it from parent and then continue. And if it's not, continue. So basically, if we already have, for some reason, I don't know why we would, well, I could probably think of a reason, but we shouldn't already have a death screen. But if we happen to already have a death screen, we'll remove it and then restart it, just so we don't have issues where, you know, we look like we've had a death screen, but then it isn't removed because we only remove one at the end. You know, this just avoids issues that could come up with invalid death screens. So make sure we're just resetting our death screen so we're ready to make a new one. Then of course we need to add this to our viewport so we can actually see the death screen, and this is all happening on the client. Remember, you know, adding this to the viewport is to the viewport of the client we're doing this on, and then we're going to wait. So search for delay. The delay time is going to be the time before new spawn, because after this time is up, we are going to make sure the death screen is valid, because if it's valid, if we still have the death screen, we are going to remove it from parent. So remove from parent, make sure this is plugged in. Add a reroute node here just so it looks more readable. If you highlight over two reroute nodes and click Q, it straightens them up automatically for you, which is quite a neat little trick. So what we're doing is we're going to run this function from the top-down character. So the top-down character is going to call this function, so client underscore show death screen. It needs the time before new spawn, and we can get that from the game mode. So get respawn time and plug it in. So the game mode holds the time to take for a respawn, and we're passing that over to the player controller, which is now going to call this function, which we'll come back to in a sec. Then it's going to make sure we spawn in our death screen, and then after however long this is going to be, for us we're going to make it 5 seconds, we're going to remove that widget from the screen. As soon as this fires, we destroy the actor, we wait a few seconds, and then we handle the respawn player on the game mode. Now, this is kind of why this has to be on the player controller and not on the player, because as soon as this destroy actor happens, none of this could fire if this was on the player. Because if we run this on the player and we destroy the player, then, you know, who's going to run the logic? There's no one in the world to run this logic. So we have to pass through to our player controller, because otherwise, you know, there's no one there remembering that we're trying to do something. But for us, this is fine. Let's go to our game mode now and handle this function. This function is going to be quite simple. It's going to take in a player. Oh, I did not mean to do that. It's going to take in an input of a player controller. Player controller. If we're respawning a player, well, it needs to know who is possessing the pawn that's going to be spawned in. We're going to check, is this valid? do a little is valid check, just just in case. It should be valid, and most times it will, but just in case, we don't want to try and possess something that isn't valid. And then we want to spawn actor from class. The class is going to be BP underscore top down character. That's just the default character. We're going to split the struct pin and set the collision handling override to try to adjust location, but always spawn. The reason I split the transform pin here is because if you have, if we recombine the struct pin and we compile, this is going to throw us an error because this thinks we're trying to spawn something, but we haven't provided a valid spawn transform. But if we split the struct pin, it technically does have a valid spawn transform because we have a 000 location, a 00 rotation, and a 111 scale, which is just the default. So it's going to spawn in the center of the world with default scale. However, this is now a valid location, whereas when the transform pin is combined, technically it doesn't actually have any value, so you can't spawn something with 0 value. So yeah, we have to do that. But if we bring this player controller over here now and click possess, or rather search for possesses, and the thing that this player controller is possessing is the thing we just created. And the reason we can allow this to just default spawn in the middle of the world is because as soon as we've possessed it, we're going to update spawn location. We're going to reuse the function we just made, which is going to snap it to the right location. Very cool. We already call that on the top down character. Very nice. Make sure that for the handle respawn player function, we pass in ourself as the player controller. And on the desk screen, I realized that I didn't set this timer to looping, so it just updated once. Make sure this timer by event is looping. You may have already done that, but I accidentally forgot. So yeah, if this is the same as you, and make sure this is looping. Now in our lobby map, if we play, we will see that we can, kill another player with our projectiles, and then they will respawn on the correct side of the map based on what team they're on. So let's drag these viewports to the side so we can see all three simultaneously. Let's accept the match for all three of them, wait for them to join in. And the reason I keep going through the lobby each time instead of just playing in the world directly is because we have to trigger our match, our team assignment system. And if we just played in the top down template, we wouldn't have gone through the team assignment, and then that's kind of like not the point of the game. So if we run down, all right, let's bring all our players to a bit close to the top. If we see, if we kill one player, or we'll just kill both at the same time, then we should now see they're both respawning. We can see the countdown timer, 2, 1, boom, they've both respawned. If we kill them again, just to make sure the logic's working, because sometimes if you do it a second time, you might have not reset things properly. There we go, it's working. Now if one of them kills the red guy, we should now see 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. He's going to respawn on the correct side of the map. Very nice. Now our damage system, our death system, our respawn and spawning system is all working correctly. In the next video, we'll look at how to make bases so that when you destroy the enemy base, the match resets, the match ends, everyone's put back to the lobby, and then you can queue up like League of Legends, where when you destroy the enemy nexus, the game ends. We'll look at how to do that, hopefully. I will see you in the next video.